Shalom. Today we are going to be discussing Parashat Lech-Lecha. Last week we were introduced to Avram, not Avraham, Avram, who would be our forefather Avram Avinu. At the time it is a little bit unclear who this Avram was. It says he was born, and it mentions much about his father Terach. Terach is the first one who has multiple sons. Whenever someone mentions multiple sons that he had, instead of saying one primary son, you know there's what to be said about him. Terach is remarkable also in that he has a father and a son of the same name. He has a father, Nahor, and apparently his oldest son is also Nahor. Avram is the middle child. And this Terach has an idea to leave the place where his family lives in Ur Kasdim and go to Eretz Canaan. And it is there that Terach decides to stay. He goes to Eretz Canaan, and they stop in Haran. Haran is in modern-day Syria, to the northeast of the land of Israel, and he decided to stay there with his family. And it's only in this week's parasha that God comes and tells Avram, get up and go to the land I'm going to show you. And it turns out it was where Terach wanted to go all along. Indeed, although our tradition says that Terach was an idolater, that's an explicit verse in Yehoshua, in the book of Joshua. To what extent he was an idolater, the sages says he even had an idol store and sold idols to people, and was one of Avram's first, not victims, his first proselytes, the people who he convinced that these idols are nothing. It was Terach's initiative that Avram and his family moved to the land of Israel. And it was only on God's command that Avram continued his journey after stopping there. Terach represents all those fathers and the previous generations who know that it's right to, let's say, move to the land of Israel, or perhaps to dedicate one's time to keeping the Torah and studying the Torah, but they themselves don't have the wherewithal, the ability to go through with what they really do. They start on that path and they set their children on that path, but they don't make it themselves. Or as someone jokingly says, Avram represents those people who come from Chutz La'aretz and make Aliyah. And Yitzchak Avinu represents those who lived in Israel their entire lives. And Yaakov represents those people born in Israel and make Yeridah and leave the land ultimately. Terach represents all those who say they're going to make Aliyah but never do. That's not exactly the right way. We don't know what Terach's considerations were. He already lost one son. We know that Avram faced a lot of persecution for his beliefs early on, before he gained a lot of followers and became basically a king in his own right. But Terach did start Avram on this way. It wasn't, Avram might not have been born to someone else, even though apparently he was a genius and he came to his theological conclusions on his own as a child. He did have the right parents. That is a lesson that we should take away with us. But it is always these lessons in the Torah that focus on one person who decides to do something different. The sages have an argument. Was Noach as great as Avram Avinu? Noach was tzaddik b'dorotav. He was a tzaddik in his generations. But if he had been with Avram Avinu, perhaps compared to him, he wouldn't have been so good. I don't know. That's an argument. But it's interesting to note that if you do the math, you see, Noach lived for 350 years after the flood. He was 600 years old when the flood started. He died at the age of 950. Avram Avinu was quite old at the time, was already Avram Avinu, according to the chronology we have in this book. And Noach's son, Shem, and Noach's great-great-grandson, Aver, were also alive at the time. Shem and Aver lived to see Yaakov Avinu also. There wasn't this disconnect between the two generations, so the comparison can be made. Rather, what are the sages getting at when they attempt to compare or contrast the behavior of Avram and Noach? They actually were contemporaries. And the answer goes like this. What was the reaction of each of these patriarchs to the situation he found himself in? We see, with regards to Noach, we don't see, with regards to Noach, any interactions he had with the people who lived at the same time as him. There are midrashim that Noach was spending 120 years to build the ark, so that when people would ask him what's going on, he'd say, God's going to wipe out the world, and you better, straighten out, this flood's going to come. But it doesn't say that he went out of his way to preach this. It also doesn't say that he prayed to God that this not happen. On the contrary, we see that his time for prayer, like we saw last week, his time for prayer was specifically after the flood had wiped everything out. Now God was starting again. That's when he offered sacrifice and prayer. But beforehand, it doesn't say he attempted to do anything. We don't know if he did, but perhaps if he did, it would have said so. What else about Noach? We see that Noach, one of the first things he tried to do, it says after the flood, he started trying to recultivate the world. And it says, Vayachel, the first thing he did, he started again, and he planted a vineyard. Now, grapes are very important. Grapes are used for sacrifice and for kiddush. Grapes are important. But apparently he did it for the sake of enjoyment. And that says he drank from the wine, and he got drunk. And the sages also have what to say about how drinking first makes someone act like a monkey and a pig and a lion, etc., not in that order. And then it could lead to, as the sages say, it leads to all the other averot. Perhaps making alcohol and wine wasn't the best thing that Noach could have done. Indeed, the sages compare the case of the Sotah, the wayward woman, and the Nazir. It says whoever sees what happened to this Sotah woman should know, like the Nazir, stop drinking wine. Noach lived in the previous generation. He saw what happened to his contemporaries for their sinning. He should have learned that lesson. Perhaps he should have taken it upon himself to avoid wine. I don't know. That's just saying that's what the Midrash is implying. Whereas in this week's parasha, we learn about Avraham Avinu, aside from the fact that the sages tell us that he went out of his way to preach. We also see explicitly that he cared for others. It says that he would invite in wayfarers. And it also says that when the city of Sodom, the worst place in the world at the time, it says that God was promising this land of the Canaanites, and it strictly defines exactly where the Canaanites were, as we mentioned a few weeks ago. The land of Canaan is the most described place in the entire genealogy of human beings, and also the families of the Canaanim are also the most detailed ones in that parasha. These Canaanim were due to be expelled from the land for their sins, and God was telling Avraham Avinu that that's going to come one day, and then his children will themselves be the masters of the land. And it says the southernmost Canaanim were the Sodomites. The Sodomites lived at the southernmost extent of the classic land of Canaan, and in this week's parasha we read that when some foreign conquerors from the east came to conquer the land of Israel, perhaps begin the fulfillment of this prophecy to Avraham Avinu, that God would take away the Canaanim and give the land to Avram, and they conquer the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Sfoim, and Bela, also known as Tzoar. These 5 cities, they're the most guilty Canaanim, and now they have been given their punishment. We see that, indeed, God promised the Jewish people that if they would not behave, they would also be taken away to Bavel in exile. So this is happening for the first time in history. The people who live in the land are misbehaving, and they're being taken away into exile in punishment for their sins. And what does Avraham Avinu do? He risks life and limb. He takes his chosen 300 and something men, those who were born in his household, and he chases after the foreigners all night and fights them and rescues the Sodomites, including Lot, his nephew, from their hands and brings them back home. Avraham Avinu, he cares so much about them. He actually goes out of his way. Next week's parasha in Vayera, we also read that Avraham Avinu was told by God that this time he can't save the Sodomites. It apparently was sometime after Avram was 75 years old, but before he was 86 years old, before the birth of Yishmael, so sometime maybe he was around 80 or so, that's when this first war happened. And it was on, by tradition, the 15th of Nisan, when Avraham Avinu was 99 years old, a year before Yitzchak Avinu was born, and Yishmael was 13, that's when he greeted these angelic visitors, and he saw the angels going to Sodom. God showed him the angels are heading off to Sodom, and then told him, I can't hide this from you right now, but I'm going to destroy this entire city. And Avraham Avinu interceded. Why? Because God was showing him the fact that he, so to speak, saw the angels walking to Sodom. The angels can't actually be seen by human eyes. What does it mean the angels are going to Sodom? God is telling him, this time I'm not letting you go and save them. The angels of destruction and the angel to save Lot, they're already on their way there. You can't stop it. And Avraham Avinu still pleaded. And his prayer took a very interesting form. First he asked, perhaps there's 50, 40, 30 righteous people, or sufficiently righteous people to save the cities in their merit. And God says, I would relent if there were that many people, implying there aren't that many. And Avraham Avinu basically brings it down to the smallest number. He says, this is very interesting. This is perhaps something that Chazal used to contrast Avraham Avinu with Noach. He says, maybe you'll find 10 righteous people there. Can you save the city on the merit of 10 righteous people? And God said, I wouldn't destroy the place in the merit of those 10 people. But apparently there weren't. In Noach's time, how many righteous people were there? There was Noach and his wife, and his children, and their wives. That's a total of 8 perhaps righteous people. And Metushelach and Noach's father weren't exactly wicked. Metushelach lived right up until the time of the flood. And Noach didn't ask God, perhaps there are 50 righteous people left in the world, there are 40 righteous people, 30 righteous people, 20 righteous people, 10 righteous people left in the world, perhaps. He didn't do that. He's the one man who's chosen to survive, but we don't see that he actually thought about interceding and praying that God not do this. This is the major difference between Avraham Avinu and Noach. Avraham went out of his way. And indeed, many of us now, when we study the story of Avraham Avinu, like the way, for example, the way Rambam describes it, Avraham Avinu realized that there's a God and tried to convince others of that. But we just said that elsewhere in the world, Noach and Shem and Ever were still alive. They had been through the flood. And Noach had talked to God. And apparently, according to other Midrashim, Ever himself was also a prophet. Shem, they identify with this Malki Tzedek in this week's Parsha. That's not unanimous, by the way, but some do identify it. Was Avraham Avinu special in the fact that he learned to recognize and worship God and behave appropriately because he knew that there's a God watching his very actions? So what's unique about Avraham Avinu if all these people were still around? And the answer is that he was the one who went out of his way to speak to other people. Apparently, what the sages are getting at is that Noach and Shem and Ever just stayed to themselves. They stayed indoors, so to speak. They stayed out of the public eye. And indeed, Rambam also says a true tzaddik, who is a righteous person, who sanctifies God's name through his behavior, is not aloof from humanity. That is, he does everything right. He is a model of behavior. He only speaks nicely to people. He's honest. He wears his tefillin and his talis all day long, and he has a way about him. He's kind to everybody, but he's also able to do this and still be a part of society without withdrawing himself. Apparently, Noach and those after him who knew about God were withdrawn. They weren't of the people. And indeed, also, they say about the righteous Chanoch, who preceded Metushelach, he did not live long. It says, for some reason, God took him at the age of 365. In the days when people used to live into their 900s, especially the line from Adam Rishon until Noach, there people lived to be 967 years old, 960. Noach himself lived to be 950. Adam lived to be 930. This Chanoch, not the Chanoch descended from Cain, but this Chanoch, the father of Metushelach, he lived to be 365, and God took him, so to speak. He was a tzaddik who could not be in this world, so he was just taken early. Once again, he doesn't fit those people. Whereas Avraham Avinu was a man of the people, a man who can bring people closer to God. And that is why, now we're, God willing, next week, we'll discuss more, how many times did God actually destroy the world or not? And God willing, we hope you join us for Parashat Vayera.